All right. Um, so we'll just open it up to any thoughts to start. I had a lot of thoughts and some questions that popped up, but we'll let somebody else talk to get going here. So, anybody have anything they want to throw out there as a conversation starter?
I'll throw a little something out. Something there. I thought there were a lot of good takeaways here. The Florida softball stuff was awesome, but the the talent code, talking about the comfort zone and the growth zone, and basically needing to create struggle for our kids to grow. I thought was really good. It's a good reminder that it's our job to take kids to a place they can't get themselves as coaches and teachers and such. So I thought putting kids in tough situations and in controlled environments is really good to help create that growth. And so when they talked about the American classes, the math classes with American math classes versus Japanese classes and such, it was interesting to me that the Japanese group, they were in struggle or conflict like 40% of the time, it said, versus 2% with American classes. So it was just interesting to me and a good reminder to me that for us to help these kids grow, we have to put them in tough situations, again, in a controlled environment, so we can see that growth. So I really like that.
I like that part too, but the question I wrote down on that, or the statement I wrote down when I kind of read through that, and I've read the book, The Talent Code by Daniel Coyle. It's a great book. Just definitely challenges some ways you think about talent. But the thought I put down was the only way this happens is if we get out of the way. So it's almost like this shift in terms of our coaching preparation is it's going to require more work on our part up front, to, like you said, create those opportunities. But then when they're happening, we've got my tendency is, again, one of impatience and one of we can do this faster another way, but just recognizing there's got to be some intentional purpose to things. And that means I've got to maybe throw some duct tape over my mouth and be quiet when those things are going on so that we can let them struggle and let them overcome those things.
I agree with you. Just from a football standpoint, I know last summer or the summer before, we started just allowing the kids to lead on their own, the stretching, and just to turn something as simple as the stretching over in the summer, it was somewhat difficult just because there's a certain way we want it done and a certain way that we expect and everything like that. So, but it did provide good leadership opportunity for those kids for sure. But it is difficult.
I thought those same things when I was reading that. It reminded me of when we were young and again, able to put our teams together, and you go out and you put a neighborhood football game together, and you're picking teams, and there's all those dynamics that go with that I always have to remind myself that these kids don't have, and we have to allow them to do that. But it is hard. It's hard to just give that away because it takes longer. It drives me crazy because I lose patience because things aren't getting done, and we only have a finite time to practice. So it's hard to let that go sometimes.
I think the important thing to remember as you think about things like that too, is you almost have to think of it like investment. It is longer on the front end, but the payoff on the back end, if we can be patient enough to let that happen is huge. You just almost think of it like investing money, like you start small, but, given the right amount of time and given the right amount of time for things to grow, the payoff is a lot bigger on the back end. But that requires kind of a long-term view of things.
Water the bamboo.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
I really like the graphic itself on the comfort zone, growth zone. I mean, we've all seen something like that before, but I think, I guess I've never really seen it where he said, okay, what are your goals? And they said, okay, here are our 5 goals. And so he put those 5 goals literally outside of the growth zone. And I mean, I'm reading between the lines here, but if we're sitting in that meeting, he probably would have said, okay, you're in your comfort zone. Mm-hmm. Your goals are outside of the growth zone. So to get there, to get to your goals, you got to go through the growth zone. A lot of people don't want to do that. A lot of people want to stay in their comfort zone and attain their goals,
Mhm.
and it's not how it works. So I highlighted basically almost this whole chapter, but which is whatever. But one part I definitely like double highlighted was at the top of page 54, where he says to incentivize the guys and to show them how the process works. Travis attached all the goals outside. I guess I said that, but the next part, as the comfort zone expands, the team grows closer towards their goals. I think that's awesome because like the more time you spend in your growth zone, what happens? Well, you become comfortable in your growth zone. You become comfortable being uncomfortable. And guess what happens? You get closer to your goal. So that stuff I wrote down. These zones can and will expand and constrict. So I don't know. I mean, maybe I'm a visual person and I like diagrams and stuff like that, but that was one of my biggest takeaways.
I like that diagram too. And something I was thinking about was just, we set these goals as teams, and maybe it's a goal that our team has accomplished in seasons before. I think of Coach Wright and the volleyball team. Girls coming back are probably going to say we want to win again.
Mhm.
And you put that on the outside and it's the growth zone, and some of those kids would probably come back and say, well, we've done that before. But the truth is we haven't done that before. Last year's team did that, but it's not the same team anymore. You got a different group of kids, you got a different dynamic, so for whatever those goals are from year to year, just the thing I like about those diagrams, it's almost like a reminder, when our team first meets at the beginning, in some ways our comfort zone is almost going back to where it was about a year ago, because we've got to integrate new people and new things, and it's just this reminder that, okay, that's not comfortable anymore. We still have to stretch ourselves to get to those things. So I think there's a lot of lessons you could attach to a diagram like that.
Well, and I think about those things too that you just mentioned, but I also think about like for the volleyball program, and yes, we achieved this big achievement, but there was so much that we didn't achieve throughout the season that to me, like I don't remember who was talking about, just like being satisfied with that victory. I'm personally not satisfied with that victory, because like there was a Facebook post out a while ago, and I'll share it with you sometime. It's called the 16th Second, I think, and it was this kid that talked about the goals that he had. He was valedictorian, and he was talking, and he basically was saying that whatever goal you achieve, what happens after that achievement takes place? Like, where are you left? And I think that we need to like reevaluate what our goal is. It might not be that end championship, but more the progress that just continually happens. Like, where do we look to once that's done? What happens right after that? Because you go back to that feeling of, okay, what's next? And for our kids, I think for me personally, I wasn't satisfied with the victory. I mean, I just want to grow our program more. So how do I instill a different sort of mentality that isn't just based on the championship? I don't know.
Based on how much better we can be in the years to come and striving for that growth,
what
right?
type of people and what type of people they are, and that character that, yeah, you can win a championship or maybe you lose, but you're failing forward. You're moving forward as a person and as a program.
Like how Mark Few reacted and that kid, Josh Perkins. It's not about the 4 years. It's about the growth that they made in those 4 years.
Yeah. Yeah, that was good.
Sometimes what I struggle with is just knowing the maturity level of our kids and how hard that is for us as adults to just focus on progress, because we want things that are measurable. We want to look back and see, have I improved? And it doesn't necessarily mean that it has to be this linear growth, but we just want to know that there's improvement there, you know. And so that's always my challenge when you know, and we talk a lot about that in our program, is we just want to be better than we were yesterday. But what does that mean? What does that look like? How can you make that tangible? You know, and it doesn't have to be, I think, measurable items, specific things, but somehow, you know, as part of this conversation, you have to have a way, there's got to be some evidence you can provide a young mind that can see there is progress, you know. And I think that's always my challenge and question with all this is what, you know, what connects with them? Because I'm 42 years old. I have a hard time remembering what the mindset of a teenager is, you know. Sometimes I think I remember, but it's definitely skewed and biased towards my age now.
A big part of this section is growth, and improvement and stuff, what you were talking about, Coach H. On page 59, you know, he's got, really his whole book is about, you know, focus on growth over the outcomes, growth over results. And I love it. Yes, you know, improvement's one of our football core values. My hang up and my question I wrote in the margins is what happens when, as coaches, and maybe this is sort of what you were saying, what happens when you don't see growth, when you don't recognize, when you don't, as a coach, when you don't realize, or you're not seeing the improvement either fast enough, or you're putting all this time in and collectively things aren't growing the way that you want them to grow. I don't have an answer to that. That was my question. And I know the fuzzy answer is, well, you know, just got to look harder, or maybe you're improving more and you just don't see it sometimes. And maybe that's right, but I don't know.
I'm right there with you. I think we get so close to it and we're so connected to it in the inner details of it that, you know, we don't always see those things that outside people are, but at the same time, you know, there's got to be some voice somewhere. I don't know how you necessarily create that, but that can be that for a team, you know. And I think that's hard for coaches to do when you're just so invested in the day-to-day minutia of everything, you know, that sometimes it can be hard to see that, especially things that aren't measurable. I mean, measurable things are easy, but we're talking about things that you can't measure with a stopwatch or a scale or something along those lines. Those are the harder things, I think, to identify. You know, and that was when he made that statement on page 53, the team set a primary goal to get better every day. I'd just be curious, like, what does that mean to them? What does it mean? Like, to me, you've got to define that more, because with the kids that we work with, well, yeah, I am better than yesterday. Well, how? In what way? What are we striving for? I mean, that could get lost and spread out in so many ways. So the note I had was, okay, I love this goal, but it's got to be more clearly defined than just that, you know?
Well, I think that is where the journal comes into play, like that you were talking about. You know, that's where we have that discussion, or they have that moment to write down, how did you get better today? How did you impact your teammate today? That just become talking points. But the other thing that kind of struck me was how long their PGMs were. They're like 15 minutes long. And for me, that's going to be like, I can see how that is beneficial, but that's hard to like, if I'm going to sit down and have a character building conversation with somebody, I feel like it's going to be a long, lengthy thing. But I also realize that they may not be able to process that for that length of time. So does anybody have any thoughts about, like, how do we do this for 15 minutes once a week and find benefit to it?
I processed through that. And the only answer I could come up with is I had to remind myself that this is a college team that gets to recruit the kids that they want, right? Mm-hmm. So you can, in some ways, I think you can speed up the process because of that. I mean, there's just certain character things you can recruit to that those things are coming in. You know, I don't think we could do something like this at a high school level in 15 minutes a week.
Yeah.
I like the time frame of 15 minutes. I think there's something powerful about having, it forces us as coaches to be quick and to the point, in terms of holding their attention span. But I think it would have to be more than once a week at 15 minutes. That was the best answer I could come up with.
Yeah.
That's what I was going to say too. We just have a different clientele. We don't get to pick our players. And Coach Clem, back to what you were saying, I mean, sometimes you just, when it's not working, when you're not seeing that progress, a lot of times that's because maybe you have, I get some Nimrods there, every once in a while. This year was amazing. I had a great group of boys this year, but almost every other year I've coached, I got at least a couple kids that are just fighting me the whole way, pulling the team a different direction. When you're talking about 18 high school boys, it's hard to, we like Jeremy said, we don't recruit these kids. We kind of get stuck. So what do you do when you're stuck with a kid with bad character that, is even a leader on your team? That's what I've run into a couple times in my coaching career, and that's a tough one to handle.
Dave, I'll say I had a situation this year, speaking from a position group standpoint, with a kid just like that, who was a senior, saw himself as a leader, but almost as the season went on, got more and more toxic. And kids even started to notice it, where they would say, man, what's going on? And I, being a younger coach, not knowing, kind of how to handle the situation and not relying on those people around me, almost tried to appease the kid rather than say, hey, you're putting yourself before the team. And so that's something I've reflected on, and kind of going through this, reading about it, just like, how do I find a way to, when I have a kid like that, kind of bring it back into the fold and kind of redirect to say, hey, we've got to put the team first, regardless of what's going on in your day-to-day life.
I really like the term that he used on page 63. We throw out the term leader a lot, and I think in our minds we want that leader to be a personal thing, or a positive thing, not a personal thing, but a positive thing. But on 63, he used the phrase alpha personality.
Mm-hmm.
And I really like that phrase, and I was just thinking about in my coaching, that's got to be a term that I kind of start to use. If I call you a leader, I'm only going to use that term in a positive way. But you might be an alpha personality on our team, that's not necessarily a good thing. We want to get that alpha personality directed in the right way. But just even thinking about terminology I use, and I just like that phrase, alpha personality. It didn't seem like it was demeaning. It didn't seem like it was negative, but I really do think it communicates what some kids are in our program. They're alpha personalities. You can't ignore them. And just trying to use that. So, Coach Gentry, as you talked about that person, I was just reminded of that phrase in the reading this section.
I would say the alpha personality is a great way to describe it. So kind of, the leader versus alpha personality. I like that.
Mm-hmm. I have a question for you guys, because I just feel like I'm using this so much I just feel so young and inexperienced with everything, even though I'm not super old. But for female sports, and I know it's the same for males on a different level, but for female athletes, and for volleyball in particular, the Papillion Vista South at this point is always going to have talent. They are, because volleyball is affluent, and we live in a affluent area, and we're always going to have talent. But these kids play at high levels throughout all the big schools. They play with each other all the time. They're on each other's teams. So the difference in their club season. So the difference for me is, how do we raise the bar in our program? And without them, sorry, I'm kind of jumping all over the place. We can be toxic. Females are toxic. No matter the talent level we have, we find some way to bring drama into our team, no matter what. And that is, for me, the biggest piece that I need to figure out. How do we control that throughout the season? So I'm asking you guys, how do you control little blips of drama that you start to see infecting your team. Because for me, all these teams around us are great. Everybody has the talent, but it's the team that stays together, loves and cares and supports each other that is going to be the difference maker. And I saw it with my team, and somehow, not by me, but by them, they chose to overcome that drama. And I want to know your guys' perspective on when you start to see something or you start to hear something, how do you interject and fix it?
Because you don't want to do too much, but you don't want to underreact either.
And I was just brought to that through the mortar and the bricks and all of that. I mean, that's for me, that's my biggest concern.
I think the important thing is we have to get out ahead of those things because we know they're going to happen. And I think we talked about this on one of the early ones, just what are those pressure points that we know are going to happen? You know, and he even talked about that on page 81. You know, when they had those two really good players that were coming off of injury and they know that playing time was going to be diminished. And he just made that statement. We knew that they were going to be coming back in January and we wanted to be proactive for this moment. And I think, like, to me, those are conversations that we have to set standards and expectations for how we're going to deal with those things long before they happen. Because if we deal with those things as they're happening, I think too many kids, girls, especially in my experience, take that as a personal attack. You know, but if we've had this conversation, like, how should you react if somebody, like, before any of this even happens, just having that conversation. If, you know, we go into a match and you're not playing well and you get taken out and coach puts somebody else in your spot, you know, what would be a championship level response to that? You know, and I think we have to have as many of those conversations up front and ahead of time as we can, so that when it happens, we're able to say, no, this is not about you. Remember, we talked about this back in the summer, you know, and we set this as an expectation on our team. And the more of those things that we can get laid out ahead of time, I think it takes the personal attack out of it, which helps kids move forward a little bit quicker. I mean, there's still, all of us would still be hurt by those things, but I think it just gives us a talking point as coaches that's not established in the moment, but has been established ahead of time. And that's something that I've kind of started to do after I read the Confidence Code book, that we've done more of in the last, and that's just for me in the last 2 years. It took me 18 years to figure that out, but so that would be my thought. But I think he kind of addressed that too, you know, like just being proactive and getting ahead of those things.
Yeah. Oh, that's good.
I know a couple of years ago, I was trying to be proactive and stole an idea from Coach Clem and went to everybody's house before the season and sat with them and their parents for a half hour, 45 minutes, an hour, hour and a half, whatever. And didn't matter. So not to be negative, but I mean, like, I still think that sometimes, you know, like but I'm just saying, like, you can do everything that you think you can try to do or think of. And sometimes it's still just going to go sideways. And, you know, I was disappointed in myself looking back on it. I probably should have just did a better job of protecting our culture and our kids, and just not have those kids around and just say, hey, there's other things you need to be doing with your time. And, you know, it's not beneficial for us. It's not beneficial for you, but you know, so, but I mean, you know, we tried. So, but I don't know if I would do it again. But I think it was a good thing to try to do.
It's something that I got away from last year for different reasons, and then I vowed that this spring and summer I was going to pick it back up again, and then the virus stuff hit. So I don't know how that's going to look. My preference for me in football and just me, I want to do it. I want to get back into doing that for all the reasons, and even if it goes south or doesn't work with a kid or a family or whatever, at the very least, I'm a type of guy that, at the very least, if I can put my head down at night and feel good about it, and that's all I can do. And I probably shared this quote with Coach G, and it's one of my favorite ones, and it connects to this topic, I guess. Is JFK said the best time to fix a hole in the roof is when the sun is shining. So if I try to fix a problem like, when it's storming outside, it's not gonna go good. So when the sun's shining and it's the spring before fall football, and we're not worried, directly worried about playing time or play calls or anything like that. That's where I can build those relationships with parents and kids, and at least get things out in the open, and this is how it's going to be. And so that's how I look at a lot of those home visits. And so I don't know if we'll be able to do them this year, which sort of sucks.
I think everybody's made a good point about getting out in front of it. And I think, and I look back at volleyball all through the summer, and this has nothing to do with mentally, but we already approached it that there would be a fifth set at some point during the year that was going to be important, that we were going to be ready for, and we're going to train to be ready for. And in the same boat, when you have had those experiences of toxic players or whatever that may be, you jumping out in front of it and basically saying, we're going to have this moment as the year goes on, we're going to be talking about this. And if you've already discussed that with them and put that out there in front of them, saying it's going to happen, whether you guys think it won't happen or not, it's going to happen. Here's how we're going to approach it when this does happen. That way they've already got that in their head, in that same way. Like I said, when I was telling them that all summer, it was from a physical standpoint. What are we gonna do mentally when it comes down to that last set, that fifth set? What are we gonna do? Well, in the same boat, what's gonna happen when we go through this point during the year?
Yep.
I was thinking too, these kids have more experiences with this than we realize, because they played on youth teams that are dealing with all these exact same issues. So I think we'd be surprised at how they could contribute to a conversation in those ways, pulling from their own personal experiences. Not this could happen. I think for a lot of kids, it would be, well, yeah, this has happened, and this is the outcome of it for our team. And I think a lot of them would recognize it never ends well for a team, And so I think for a lot of these students, there's a prior experience to build off of in all of that.
Coach Wright, your Girls in Leadership Academy continually talked about a turning point in the year, and that was the meeting that they had in the adversity that you're talking about. In all three classes, 3 separate girls referred to the meeting, and they said it all got straightened out. There was confrontation and some feelings were hurt, but people found out about each other, and from that point started kicking butt.
Yeah. Unfortunately for me, as a learning moment for me, because I wish I would have done this all a lot earlier. But at the same token, I think about that in another light, and I think if I would have done it earlier, it would have came from me. And I had to let it play itself out like that to allow the transformation to occur, and it really had nothing to do with me. So I think we want to control so much and at the same time let it all go at the same time. So for me, it's like I'm going to over prepare and then let go. And so much easier said than done, but I think that's what has to happen for them to be given the best opportunity for them to be successful.
When I think about all these conversations, I'm reminded of a sermon my pastor at my church gave a number of years ago that, like, I was sitting in church Sunday, and sometimes you zone in and out, but this one just like hit me straight between the eyes. But he was talking about the word tension, and how for so many of us, we try to avoid tension. But the reality is, like, tension is needed. We need it. We need it to get better. We need it to grow. And I just think about that sometimes with kids. We have all these messages of like right now with this whole coronavirus thing, it's kind of starting to drive me nuts, but everybody finishes every email or every text with "be safe." And we're such a safety minded society that we forget that like safety is like this avoidance of all tension and danger. But really we need tension. We need it. And our teams need it to compete at a high level. It's just trying to find that balance of tension that is this fine wire that you walk. You could have had that same meeting, next year, that same meeting can happen, but it can go a completely different way. And, because it's just this fine wire of tension that things can get thrown out of balance so quickly. But, just for us to understand, like, it's okay that there's this tension at work, and we should actually strive for that and seek to find it. And, like, some conflict is a good thing, if it's done in a healthy way. There's tension that needs to happen in that for us to get better. When things are all hunky-dory, we tend to really not do very good.
Well, and they're so much more invested in themselves when it occurs on their terms instead of ours. When that tension leads to them being invested in their whatever that is.
When Katie first started talking about that, it was very interesting because I thought the exact opposite for my wrestlers, because we have a problem with the wrestlers who don't want to have any tension at all because they don't want to get after it in the practice room. And again, we throw around the word soft and stuff like that. But that's what it is. And, for us to have that tension that you guys are talking about in our wrestling room, just like we're saying, would be a vast improvement in helping us to achieve some things. And sometimes, as coaches, we look at each other like, these guys will wrestle live in practice, but are afraid to take each other down, or to pin somebody or whatever it might be. And, we just look at each other as coaches sometimes and just go, man, are we going to ever have any conflict in here? Are we going to, and I think that's right along the lines of what you guys are talking about. And sometimes I wish that was the case more so, within the wrestling room, but I think it would help us. But very good point. Very good point.
One big takeaway that I had through all of this as well, that, if we end up doing anything, whether it's as teams or as a staff, that just jumped out at me through this whole section was and Coach Cooley is great at reminding me of this as well, but kids get behind what they create. And, he started off the chapter on page 45 at the very bottom of the page, like they were looking for an anti-speaker. And we always think about when we do these things, like, what are the speakers? Who could we bring in? But really it's just, I just love that quote. They're looking for the opposite of the traditional "you speak, we listen" model. They want their kids invested in conversation happening. And then later on they're talking about, on page 71, where they talk about that TED Talk by Margaret Heffernan, which, if you've never watched it, is worth watching. She talks about super chickens and how they all kill each other. It's kind of interesting. But down below that on page 71, it says what motivates people are the bonds and loyalty and trust that develop between each other. And I think too many times when we get in the way as coaches and when we drive things, the bonds are between us and players. And what we want is bonds between them. Mm-hmm. Right. And so, like, I just love the word that pops up in here a lot too, is, and then at the end in 100 on page 100, it's his roadmap. Number 3 is facilitate. Is facilitate. You're not talking a lot. And I just love how he says it's just about asking the right questions. Like our job is to ask the question and then shut up and let them talk. And then the bonds can establish between them as they learn about each other and they connect through that. So I think if we create anything out of this, that's got to be a huge thing that we remember. It's not about what coach is going to get up and teach what lesson. It should be what coach is going to get up and ask this question, and then we're quiet, and finding resources that facilitate great conversation or spark great conversation amongst the kids. So that was just a huge reminder, and I just saw a theme kind of run throughout that part there. Anybody had any thoughts on that?
Hey, Coach Cooley, you remember how with KG, Kevin Garnett, and he, of course, being a player at the time too, but just his leadership and how he would go through all those practices and he would always ask the questions. He knew the answers to them, but he would ask the questions to kind of create that linear cohesion, between the players and not coming across as maybe calling out his teammates, but he would ask the question, and boy, that's very powerful to have that ability to do that, not only as a coach, but certainly as a player. As a high school player, that's really difficult, but for him as a professional, it's just pretty cool. I don't know if you made any reference to that before or not, Coach Cooley, and leadership with KG.
No, just with our basketball team, we haven't with Leadership Academy. Based off what Coach Hazlehorst just said, though, in terms of letting ask questions and then letting the players talk. But you get the wrong players talking, that's a problem. That's a big problem.
Big problem.
I mean, there's people that need to shut up, and then I'd say even before that, hey, you 2, you 3, you 4 need to be absolutely dominating this conversation here. Because somebody will speak up and like, what are you talking about? You have done nothing to show you're committed to this team. So it's pretty important. And then you find out, but if that happens, there's always a learning opportunity there too. Because if you find out, you can ask a kid, why did you not speak up? Why did you let that person speak? Why would you not speak? You know better. So both ways.
Yeah. One more thing while I'm unmuted, doesn't happen much, is I just got to tell, Katie, the reason why, it's because of your humility. You're deflecting all of the credit with your team. There's a reason why your team became the team they were, and it has a lot to do with who you are. So I just had to throw that out there.
Thank you, Coach.
Coach Hager, I always know you got a lot of good ideas. What was the takeaway, 1 or 2 that you had?
The big one for me was I liked the Florida Gators softball one for sure. The mortar thing was really good. First of all, obviously, I don't know if we can bring in 50 bricks into the weight room, if Coach Pullman would like that idea in the summer or not. But and then when he did the thing, I know it's cheesy as hell, but I think it had to have resonated with the picture with the little girls, and like knowing like, hey, this is why you played, like you loved the game and not worrying about the expectations. Even at the freshman level, I get caught up in the winning part and whatnot. And I know for a fact for kids, winning is what matters too. So and you guys could probably help with that. How do you teach kids that winning isn't the ultimate goal all the time, and trying to focus on, the other things and loving the game and that kind of thing? I just thought for them to do that at the Division I level was really, really cool to see, because those guys' jobs are on the line every year with that kind of stuff. But for him to have that perspective, I thought that was really unique.
That coach would have to model that. There's no, if he or she didn't, then they would instantly lose the credibility. He couldn't say, I think it was a he. He couldn't say, this is why you play it. You play it for the love of the game. Don't worry about the results. And then if he's always preaching winning championships and results and all this stuff, then it wouldn't work. So I agree. He would, which is unique when his job's on the line and all that stuff. So Yeah, that was a question I had too. Is I'm all for that, but then as the adult, as the coach, how do I frame that for them?
Well, and Mark Few kind of answered it too when they were talking and the author asked him like, what's your, would a championship validate your career? And I thought his response to that in a one-on-one setting, let alone in front of the media, was pretty awesome to hear. Like, no, it's about whether these players, when they graduate, do they take pride in playing for Gonzaga and look back on their experience and love it? I mean, again, for a guy of that magnitude to say that and not worry about his wins or, beating Coach K in the Final Four, like it's like, that's a good perspective to have, I guess.
I think obviously the measurable parts of the game, no matter what, are important. But if they're the priority has to be the character build. Like the priority for us has to be that character building at the high school level. That's what we're doing. We're high school teachers creating humans, like helping to make good humans. So if we're putting the win and the loss before how they treated each other on the court, then it's just not right. It's just not what has to happen rightfully as a teacher and a coach. We have to model that to begin with, and then I think then we gain that trust that we can always talk about the wins and losses and what comes after that at all times.
We could always speak from our own experiences. I mean, I would venture to guess everybody on here, if we pose the question, what do you remember from your high school experience or your college experience of playing athletics? I would guess we wouldn't talk much about records. We'd talk about coaches and relationships and the process and all those things, so just speaking to kids about our own experiences and hopefully you've gained some credibility with them and maybe they'll, if you frame it that way, maybe they'll kind of take that perspective as well. But you want to be careful because you're competing to win games. So you don't want to just completely throw that out the door. I mean, it's tricky.
The thing that we do at the beginning of every cross country season, before we sit down and write any goals or targets or whatever word you want to use there, is I ask the girls to list out their top 5 memories from last year, just for them individually. And then we talk through those things, they share them. And I just pose that question, what are your top 5 memories? And everybody goes around and share them. And then we kind of do something like he does in this book. Then we kind of classify them in terms of, like, were they connected to people or were they connected to performance? Because some kids will talk about winning a meet or, running a PR, but most of them, it's some silly story that I didn't even know happened, and they all start laughing because they all remember it, but like, that's the thing that a year later still sticks with them. But then, to your point, Coach O.D., we always come back and say all of those things happened as we were chasing excellence. It was this pursuit of excellence. We're not the knitting club. We're not just getting together to make stories and I don't think you would have the same memories in the knitting club without the pursuit of excellence. So that's kind of the approach that we take, is to remind them that we're trying to make these memories, but they're going to happen as we are, chasing this excellence. But I think it does kind of help put perspective for them that, we can make a big deal out of the wins and losses, but you're going to come out of this with a lot of memories as well. So, not to bash anybody that's a knitter, I'm sorry. So.
Coach Johansson looks ticked off there.
I was just going to say, my wife picked up knitting a couple months ago. She's kind of going to be pissed off, Coach H.
I'm glad you have headphones in and she can't hear that comment then, so I'm good.
She's in the room next door, so she heard it. I'll pay for it later.
Any other thoughts here at this time?
All right, get your popcorn ready. I'm going to do a book report here. I'm not the huge reader. My books include all these things on training and conditioning, so they're really boring. But this section probably hit me as well as any book has in a while, from a different perspective, because my perspective is going to be way different than your specific teams. And right out the gate, you know, basically he was asking this Travis Knight, who's a strength and conditioning coach, to give updates Sunday night before these Growth Mondays. And right away, that's all I thought it was. Most of the time when we're talking in 0 hour, or if I email you, text you, we're talking in the summer, this is for all you coaches. This is basically what a lot of times I'm trying to get at in terms of how are the kids doing, you know, or, you know, we'll talk about the game itself, but how was their reaction during the game, after the game, whatever, because that actually plays into maybe the next morning when they're in the weight room. There may not, it's not full on, let's talk about this, but there's a lot of things that I can filter into conversation with the athletes themselves while they're lifting, and kind of get something out of them, or get them to talk sometimes through what's going on. And by the way, if I'm ever overstepping my bounds, coaches tell me. But sometimes I think it does help them to, maybe it's talking to me and not to one of you guys. And that gives them a different perspective on things. I watch the games. I know what happened in the game, but how do you feel after the game, or how are you feeling amongst each other? So that already hit home right away. And then moving on in the next part of it, with you guys already talked about it, with the comfort zone and getting out of the comfort zone. This is what I'm doing constantly. And Coach Young, you know about this, I talk about this all the time, but what we learn under the bar, and that's metaphor for any one of your, you know, what you learn from your race, what you learn from your practices, things like that. I always call it what you learn under the bar. And the bar doesn't lie. It's going to get you out of your comfort zone at some point. And that's what the weight room for me, the meathead, I know, gets me. That's how I can basically do my preaching and have it be a metaphor for everything that they do outside of the weight room itself. And so when I saw that and I read that, I mean, that's exactly what, maybe I don't get that point across a lot, but that's exactly where I'm trying to come from, in terms of not just physically showing them numbers, here's what you do. It's more so just as much what they're thinking mentally as they approach something that they've never done. And, you know, you talk about with powerlifting, or even when we test out or anything like that, I want to get them to a point where they've done something they've never done before. That's getting them outside their comfort zone. And then from that, I can sit there and talk about how that's going to affect them on the court, on the field, whatever that may be. So that right away, this whole, you know, and then moving on to the growth and outcome, it's that same thing. We're going to have an outcome from it, but what did you learn while you were there? What did you learn when you were underneath that bar? But so that I know we talked about grind and grit and all that different stuff. That's the grind I'm talking about. It's not grinding in terms of trying to make them do something that is going to hurt them or anything like that. It's a mental grind to find out where you actually can go, what level can your body go to that our mind keeps stopping us from doing. Does that make sense?
It's funny that you make that comment about our mind stopping us. I mentioned before, I'm doing a book study with a group of students on a book called Peak Performance. And I mean, that's one of the sections that's in there is how our body has been biologically designed to be self-regulating and stop itself from killing itself. You know, so like all these signs of discomfort that we get when we're doing physical activity, it's our body just stopping us from going too far that we kill ourselves. But we're nowhere close to that point, you know, but it's just talking about that we have these innate self-regulators that we have to learn to override. You know, but if we don't ever talk to kids and just having the conversation with kids about that, they're like, man, I never knew that. And just how that alone was kind of eye-opening from them. Oh, it's scientific. Okay. So if I go past that, I really am going to be okay. And that's why that's there. And, you know, it just makes me laugh because we just had a conversation about that last week with a group of kids. So.
I think, and then moving on, as I was looking through it again, I mean, even we've talked about this with other coaches, how to set, you know, they moved on to setting a higher standard, watering the bamboo and all that stuff. But moving on from a standard like what if, and coach was talking about too, we've won a championship. What next? Like, how do you set that standard even higher? And how do you reinforce that? You know, it even talked about it on 85. It can be a challenge when you know you're going to crush a team. When you know you're just flat out better. Clemenger, when you're up against Omaha Bryant, how do you get them ready to play? You know, when you know it's just going to be this way. So that moving forward, how do you set that standard even higher and not just simply say, well, I hope we just get better. Well, what makes us better? But what can we get to in terms of, and I always say, like I said, under the bar, finding out I can do more, but as your team, what standard can you set to say I can even do more? Because like I said, like we just talked about, our minds can put a limit on things, but there's something out there that we can still go strive for. There's more out there to be obtained.
You know, like as I'm going through this virus stuff, I just keep looking at this as an opportunity for us. And the whole under the bar, I love that. We are under the bar right now. Like, what are we made of? What are our kids made of? And I want to figure out a way. I'm kind of in the midst of figuring out how do we connect with these kids right now and use this as an opportunity where we have time to meet with them and like go through all this mental stuff that we want them to produce in our season the next time we get to compete. What are your guys' thoughts on how you might be doing this if you're going to? I'm just curious because I'm in the midst of like writing it out. What is it going to look like? How often are we going to meet? Because we truly have the ability to make this a competitive edge against other programs that aren't doing anything like this, that aren't, you know, using this valuable time that maybe they could be doing something. And I want our kids to feel that. I want them to feel like I am getting ahead right now. I am going to be prepared when my time comes again. So I'm just curious what you guys are doing.
We're going to start meeting because my biggest worry with not having summer, I could care less about the physical side that can happen in terms of our cross country team. What I'm extremely worried about is the team development side of things. That can only happen if we're together and if we're communicating. And so much of our team connection happens when I send our girls out on a run and they talk about who knows what, but they come back and they've had time to connect, you know, but they're not going to have that right now. So for me, I've just been trying to craft series of questions that I can ask them, that we can have some Zoom calls and they can talk about these things. You know, like one of the questions that we're going to talk about right off the bat, and I'm going to prep our kids who are going to be leaders in our program first. I'm going to meet with them first, and we're going to talk through, here's the question we're going to ask, and then set up some breakout rooms so that one of those kids is in each of those, so that I don't send them into a breakout room and then it's just 3 minutes of silence and crickets. You know, back to Coach Cooley's point, I've prepared an alpha personality to an extent, you know, like here's some talking points, here's some ways to keep the conversation going. But one of the first questions is just going to be how is what we've learned, how is what we've learned through this coronavirus from a mental standpoint going to help us in a race? And I think kids are smart, and they're going to have good answers to those questions. But sometimes it's just having the opportunity to say that without an adult around. I think when we're around, they want to give the answer that they think we want to hear. And I don't want an answer that you think I want to hear. I just want you to talk with your teammates and converse. And so just been trying to come up with little video clips, like some of the stuff that's in here. I love the video clip of the kid walking across the street, just simple little things like that I can use that, they can watch ahead of time, or I can screen share and I can show a 90-second clip and we can go from there. So that's kind of what my thought process is. And to add to your point that this could be a competitive edge, I don't know if anybody saw on Twitter today, but Millard West tweeted out something that there's some big announcement coming up, and it was some athletic leadership thing, but the statement was from the All Blacks. Better people make better Wildcats. And so I think we have to recognize this could be an advantage for us, but we're not the only ones seeking to do these types of things. And I think it's important to recognize that our competition is doing these things. So it's not just an edge, it's going to be something we have to stay competitive. So to your point. So I'll add to it, Coach Wright. That's where I've been throwing some things out on Twitter, because every time I'm out and about and I'm searching for things that I can use. So some of those things I'm putting out on Twitter now because they'll be conversation starters we can loop back to. So
yeah, that was great. Your tree was great. I'm going to use it.
Go jump on those bike trails. It's right on the west end of Walnut Creek against the cornfield, between that cornfield that's between us and the creek, and you go along that fence line. It's easy to find. There's like 5 trees in a row that are just growing around wires. It's pretty fascinating. I'd never noticed it before until the other day.
Jeremy, I was fixing fence yesterday, and I came across trees that are doing the exact same thing on the farm. Like there's fence lines that are like the entire fence is inside the tree. So it was really good, but it was interesting. One thing I kind of took away from this is just it does an awesome job of using like stories and analogies and visualizations in order to make connections. Like one thing that I struggle with in my messages, I'm talking a lot, and I think that's one way they make their PGM so short, is I think he's able to give them like a quick hitter video or picture, and then they talk, and then it's like boom. It's so easy. Like the metaphors and analogies are so simple and easy that it makes the conversation a lot better and come a lot quicker. And so that's one thing that this book's really kind of challenging me on in my own kind of mental performance team culture building curriculum that I've kind of built, is just trying to make things shorter and quicker, and use those things that stick. Try and find ways to make things more sticky for the kids, because then when you come back to it, it's super, like something comes up, you can just say, hey, brick and mortar, and it's something fast, and they all know what it means. And I think it kind of realigns them. And then the other thing was just like the consistency part of it. So like it's one thing to just teach it, but then you got to keep coming back to it. And I noticed that there's that story in there where they stopped doing it, and then the players immediately knew it, and it kind of became like they made a joke about it. And like, that's probably the worst thing that you want to have happen. So just staying really consistent with it and coming back to it, and not just saying, hey, sweet, we did it. Like, cool, we read this book, we did it one day, and then never coming back to it again doesn't really do anything for you. So those are the 2 big things that I really took away from it. I don't know if we have to do like everything exactly like the book does. I think they mentioned like they met on Sunday nights and they figured out, okay, what does our team need? I think baseball's got different problems than what football needs, and volleyball's got different things than what soccer needs. And so I think that's really important. But I don't know. Those are the two big things that I took out of it.
They mentioned when on Monday they would do this. Before practice, after practice, before weights, in the morning. Did anybody catch that? I'm just curious.
There's some videos on whatdriveswinning.com. I don't think he mentioned in the book, but for some reason, I think I remember I watched, like Brett Ledbetter does an interview with this Travis Knight guy on whatdriveswinning.com. And I think they did it right at the beginning of practice. Like that was the first thing they did at practice when they did it on Monday. I don't know if that's correct, but that's, for some reason, I remember seeing that somewhere.
I mean, the advantage we have at our school is we're doing it every day for 50 minutes and with a lot of the athletes in Leadership Academy. So it's already started. I don't know if we forget that sometimes, but I mean, I think next year we're up to like 108 kids. And there's a heck of a lot of athletes in that 108. So I think it was mentioned earlier, like 15 minutes and a week, and it's just not enough. And if your athletes are in there, not saying it's because it's because the environment of the kids themselves having conversations with themselves. That's what makes it so good. They work through things, they listen to each other. We just provide things like this for them to work through those conversations. So we just keep, again, it doesn't help everybody, but I've seen growth out of a lot of people, and the programs that tend to have a lot of kids in there, I think Coach Hazor sort of tested this too. There's been some growth in the last 2 or 3 years when you get back-to-back just classes of the same sport in there, and then they can make those connections with each other.
Just to kind of build off of John's last statement about consistency, Coach H, we've had this conversation. Like we have easy jobs. Like I don't have to worry about like what kind of barrier Millard West is going to put in lane 4. And then the next race, what kind of barrier Lincoln Southwest is going to put in lane. Like I don't have to worry about everybody else. Like we just take care of ourselves and show up on race day. And you have a little bit with your distance girls. There's more strategery than there is in the sprints and some of those other events. So just like consistency, the thought that came into my head is like focus on you. I know that's hard with like basketball and football, you know, scouting and wanting to get all this stuff in place and like, but just, you know, I'm going through the list, you know, like what's really important, society scorecard versus, you know, the player scorecard. They're putting down things like family, friends, happiness, health, peace of mind, relationships. So focus on you. Don't scout it. Like, don't worry about scouting so much. Take care of the things that you need to take care of. Be good at the things that you really want to be good at. Here's the 5 plays we're going to run. Here's the 10 sets we're going to run. Like, this is what we're going to be awesome at. That develops peace of mind with the athletes. You can focus on things like, you know, family, friends, happy, healthy, those sorts of things. So that was my big takeaway reading this was just focus on, the more you focus on you, the better off you're going to be. I remember with like basketball, I did a scout for Southwest. Here's what they do. Here's what they do. Here's what they do. Goodness gracious. We couldn't even defend a back cut, back screen. And it was like, well, crap. If we can't even defend a back screen, we have no chance against stopping Southwest. And so just kind of reemphasize some thoughts that I've had and conversations that we've had. If we can focus on ourselves, and if they're telling us what's really important is family, friends, happiness, peace of mind, health, then if we're focusing on ourselves, we have more time to develop those things and those ideas. So just my thought.
I'd piggyback off that as well. And we just think about, I mean, we do have some kids on our teams that are great leaders. So if we as coaches take the lead on these things early, you know, and you put in the work up front and then you let them create, and, you know, when you get to the season, it's our job then is just to make sure time is crafted, that we have time set aside to do it. But I don't think we have to lead it every single time. I think we've got some kids who are pretty darn smart, who know their teammates really, really well. Just we put in some of the work on the front end now, like Coach Wright said, and by the time our seasons roll around, we could have some structures and some systems in place that we've got some kids ready to turn something over to and say, hey, you got this week, you got this week, you got this week, you got 15 minutes, be ready to go. And support your teammates and invest in your team, and you create something great. And, that takes something else off our plate, and lets them do the work. So the other thing I thought of too, that I loved in here, was towards the end where they asked the kids to write down like their top 3 PGMs. I always think about something that I get hung up on sometimes is, well, is this going to connect with everybody? And it's not my job to connect every lesson to every kid. If I have enough of these, I almost think of it like a shotgun blast. Not every pellet hits the target, but, some pellet's going to hit some kid, and that's what we need over time. So the more shots I take, the more pellets I have in my gun, then the more likely we do it. So if we just do it 1 or 2 times, we're probably going to miss a lot. But if we can do it on a consistent basis, that's where I think things get sticky, because every kid's going to connect to something different.
Let's not also forget just the power of, I think the term we've used in practice is just a 1-minute assessment. And it doesn't have to be an assessment, but just, I think too often, and I'm the worst at this, I get caught up in thinking it has to be this structured meeting in the classroom. Whereas these, if you think of, I mentioned it on the chat there, that when Jesus would stop and just share a parable with his disciples, it's not like he said, okay, on Monday, we're going to have a PGM and I'm going to talk about the prodigal son. I mean, it was something that was just spontaneous because it's just who he is. And he would just more or less, share his character of who he is, who God is. And so as a result, it just kind of permeates everything. I mean, it's just kind of woven into his fabric. And so I think that's what we want our programs to be, is just about our culture, to where at all times, whether it's at halftime, whether it's, during a heated moment in practice where there's an argument, whether it's, you can name 1,000 different scenarios. Those are the moments to kind of seize. And as much as I would like to say, I mean, it has to be, I think the spontaneous ones are always maybe the more powerful ones, not taking anything away from a PGM or a pre-practice meeting, but the spontaneous ones seem to have the most impact, for whatever that's worth.
Well, and I think the reason that they're spontaneous, sorry if phone's going off, the reason they're spontaneous is because something happened right before that correlates to it. And so there's a connection made at that point, like whether it was an argument or whether it was some, play that went wrong or whatever it might be, there's a connection to that. And so that spontaneity just makes an impact instead of it just being one more classroom session we have to go to.
I agree completely with the spontaneity part. And I think something that's important for us to remember, though, is that we are dealing with a bunch of kids that don't ever speak in the spontaneity. As I think through what I want this to look like, I want this to be athlete driven, and I mean, I just, how many times I just ask my girls, hey, anybody got anything they want to say, anything that they want to share with the team? And it's just, and we try to create that. And once a week, maybe somebody will say something. And then usually if one person does, a couple people will speak up, but it's just, like we as coaches are looking for those spontaneity things. But I think the power in this and what they were trying to hit on all this is creating a place for kids to talk that's safe, that's not coach driven. And that's where I think is the difference between this. If we're going to create, I'm not looking to create anything where it's me talking to my kids some more. I don't need more of that. I would want something like this to be a place for kids to lead and take the reins with it, because they need more of that. So I'm not arguing with the spontaneity. I just think it serves a different purpose than it should be the student speaking, not the teacher speaking, if we craft something correctly, in my mind. Any other thoughts at all?
That was really good wait time, Mr. Hazelhorst. I wanted to let you know that.
I counted to 7 very slowly in my head. I'm trying to practice my Japanese math teacher in me and let you all struggle with the material and the thoughts that may be ruminating around your head.
All right, it got me. Last one. The Florida situation was kind of refreshing because at the end, they didn't win. And it seems like even in what drives winning, a lot of times the people he's kind of putting in the spotlight are winners. I mean, in terms of scoreboard championships, pedigrees. So now I realize they had already won like 2 in a row prior to that. But, I think of Millard North this year and the fact that, they had that big lead against Bellevue West in that championship game. And, I'm wondering, as Bellevue West now reflects on their season, are they thinking about a moment that they feel is kind of a turning point to where they, were able to become champions again? And I'm, objectively, I'm going, well, Millard North just blew it. That's what I'm thinking. But I'm sure through the lens of Bellevue West, they can find something, that they kind of redeem as, I don't know. This whole winning, losing. I mean, I know that, Coach Cooley and I agree this was one of our most enjoyable years of coaching this team. And yet we still didn't get it done. And boy, I wrestle with this one. I've had this conversation with you, Coach H. I wrestle with this stuff because I see the forest. I see the big picture. I get it. I know that my identity is not as a coach, and it's in being a child of God, blah, blah, blah. I get all that, but doggone, I want to win too. I want a stinking banner up, and it's a challenge for me. So the reason why we're all on this right now is not because we don't want to win. Man, we want to win more than anybody. At the same time, though, ultimately, what is winning? I don't know. I'm just now getting kind of deep into self-reflection, but anyway, I just thought that it's interesting about that Bellevue West Millard North thing, because I know when we went into, last thing, we go into the last 10 seconds against Millard North, came out of that timeout, and they had the ball. And I just remember thinking, I said this audibly in my head. I said, surrender the outcome. Surrender the outcome. That kind of goes back to, we've done some stuff with, what are those 2 guys? No goals guys. Anyway, Gilbert, somebody like that.
Josh Metcalf and Jamie Gilbert.
Yeah. I just remember saying that to myself, surrender the outcome, surrender the outcome. And it didn't work. He made the shot. Dang it. I was kind of hoping by surrendering the outcome, it would maybe work in my favor. It didn't work, but no, in all seriousness, I just knew that regardless of how the last 2 possessions there worked out, I guess we had done all we could, and I don't know, we would have to just kind of, I'm done. I'm too much reflection.
I say this jokingly, but if I would have heard you say that, I'd have told you to shut up.
I think it goes back. We're never going to find this. I don't know. Just as I listen to you talk, I just think back to that word tension. I mean, there's just always going to be this tension between character and winning. And it's not it's just, and it's going to pull back and forth between that. And I'm just kind of getting to the point where I'm okay with it. I'm not going to apologize for the fact that I want to win. I'm not going to minimize the fact that I want to win. You know, it's just, I just come to accept that's just been part of who I am. It's part of how God created me. It's part of how I tick. And then I'm okay telling kids that, you know, like I don't have a problem. Yeah, I'm going to invest in you as a person, but we're doing it in the light of competition. We're doing it in the avenue of trying to be the best that we can be in what we're doing. And, you know, if I pick on knitting club again, so Jared, close your wife's ears, but you know, like if all I just cared about was character, I just sit around the knitting club and we talk about character as we knit sweaters and pot holders. But no, darn it, I want to see kids get really fast on a cross country course and go run somebody down and kick their butt, and I'm okay with that tension that it presents. And to your comment about, oh, go ahead, Coach Wright.
Sorry, it's just that vessel. That's the vessel that we choose. We choose our sport as the vessel to teach character as well as our sport, you know? So it's both. It is both. That's our job, is both.
Your comment about Miller North and Bellevue West, because it was the last sporting event that I watched on TV before all this happened. So
the entire nation.
Yeah, like I haven't even watched any replays of anything. I'm not even gonna go down that. I want something new. But as I think back to that game and you talk about what the difference was, to me, it's this whole conversation we've been having about culture. I mean, Millard North had more talent on the court, but I mean, no offense to Millard North, I'm gonna guess that Bellevue West has a little bit better culture over time. Woodward's been there longer than Cannon's been at Millard North, and I know Cannon's had success other places, but he hasn't. You know, it doesn't just translate to a new school. And to me, it was just that culture thing. You know, like if you've got a strong culture in place, you know, it rises up in moments like that and can overcome talent in issues. You know, Bellevue West had great talent. They had some kids who can play some basketball, you know, but I think man to man, position to position, you know, if you lined them up and said who you taking between Millard North and Bellevue West, you know, out of 12 spots, Millard North's probably taken 10 of the 12 spots from a talent standpoint. So I could be wrong. I'm not a basketball expert. I just watch kids run fast up hills on grass. So I like these conversations. I just have to say that. So.
Well, that I sent out some of you. I could get it to more of you if you wanted it, but that John Harbaugh had a little sit down with athletes in action, and yeah, he's now my favorite coach, by the way, Clem. If you want to know NFL football coaches, I'm now a John Harbaugh fan. So I told Cooley I'm on his bandwagon, but he had a great little segment, and I just love how he articulated himself and connected things to also his faith, but you know, his famous quote of his dad's, I believe, it's attack the day with an enthusiasm unknown to mankind. And then he says, you know, AKA that's Holy Spirit enthusiasm. But I love how his fight, you know, we were talking about that. You just mentioned tension. He's got great tension between the two. So in terms of character / you know, identity. So I encourage you, if you want to, I can share that with anybody that wants it. I don't want to continue to dominate this, but it's been good. I do need to get going here. I got to get some things sent out, but I'm going to have to sign off.
That's like when we go running, he's talking 90% of the time. I'm talking 10%. Nobody believes me.
That's because he's in better shape and you're just trying to breathe while you're out there running with him, or
that's probably what it is. Our kids would be disappointed if we're not trying to win. You know, I mean, it's really important to us. It's really important to them. I was listening to a Jay Billis They've got a bunch of basketball coaching videos out there, and he just said a couple of things. I'm just reading some notes here that makes me think of this stuff, and then I'll connect it. But just says it's always important to keep in mind that you are there for the players. The players are not there for you, and that is so true. That is simple and profound. And he just talks about the power that we hold over these players, and we need to be careful of that. We need to make sure it's through love. And he talked about a story of he was sitting around with a bunch of high school teammates at a reunion, and his wife, when they left, he apologized for talking about their basketball team the whole time. And his wife immediately said, "You're all scarred by the negative impact of your high school coach." Wow, I didn't know that. He's like, "What are you talking about?" You said that's all you talked about is how terrible an experience he was, and he didn't even realize that's what they talked about it. And then he just had the phrase, "Now, how do you want your players to think of you 30 years from now?" And that doesn't mean like fun, jolly, good old stuff. I'll tell you this: I went out for a run the other day, and I got real tired, and I mean, he wouldn't know it if I said it, but I thought, man, I'm not going to stop. Coach Lynham did not teach me to stop when I was 15 years old when he made me run those Halleck's for baseball. I'm not stopping, and I didn't stop. And that's Coach Clevenger would agree with the same thing. Not that he's getting out there hitting the open roads by any means, but but he knows what I'm talking about. I mean, that's 25 years later. So that's just a real example of some of these kids are not going to know what we're doing right now, and that's okay. They're the top 10% get it. It's like anything in the middle are just kind of, just drifting through, and then at some point they're gonna get it if we're doing it the right way, and it's gonna click. Just like Coach Lynham's had it clicking in my head for 25 years now. So.
Well, and I don't know how many of you guys read the Dallas Rogers Clem. I thought that was fantastic. It will stick with me forever. The velvet brick is perfect. Like, I will reflect on that. Am I too velvety? Because that's probably my shortcoming side. And I love it. It's great. I don't know if were you the one who shared it with him?
Well, it's, as you brought that up, I mean, we didn't make up the lesson. We don't get credit for the phrase velvet covered brick. But if you're thinking about coming up with things that you could use with your team, and I mean, this is what we use in Leadership Academy. There are these things called habitudes, and you could buy a book there by Tim Elmore. There's a bunch of them, but they're great. I mean, that's what we use regularly in Leadership Academy. We do about one a week, and he's the one who came up with the lesson, the velvet covered brick. So Dallas gives us credit, but we don't deserve any credit for it. We just printed it out of a book and had a conversation in class about it. And so, I mean, those would be something that, I've got them scanned in PDF wise. I can send you a whole bunch, and they're a couple pages long. They're short, easy reads. There's reflection questions. And we put kids into groups and have them talk about those things. And that'd be easy stuff that you could put out in front of kids.
That'd be amazing. I'd appreciate it.
And I don't think Coach Cooley would be a problem if we end up talking about the exact same thing in Leadership Academy that they've talked about before on their teams, and just add to the conversation. So
yeah, because then they can just teach it. They'll know it.
And that's the point of this, right? Is that we're kind of creating a common language among all the teams and a common pillar of character that we're all striving for. And so the more repetition, the more concrete examples that they have to hold on to and visualize and think back to in those tough moments. I think isn't that the whole point? That's what we're doing here.
Yep. We don't have to hide anything. We don't have to save anything.
I tell my students all the time that I am not a great creator, but I am a tremendous thief. And so when they're always like, "Wow, Coach H, how'd you come up with that?" I didn't. I stole it from somewhere. So I don't have any problem distributing things to other people. I'll share the folder. I have a OneDrive folder that I can share that has all those in PDFs, and you can look through things and find some that would match your team. So
that'd be awesome. Thank you so much.
Yep. All right. Any other thoughts for the day?
Thanks, Coach Hayes Horse.
Yep. Thank you.
I'm just good at sending out an email. It takes all of you people being a part of this to contribute and make it happen. So otherwise it'd just be boring looking at myself on a computer screen.
Oh, you love doing that. Knock it off.
Love looking at these giant bags underneath my eyes that always show up when I spend too much time looking at technology. So that's what all this time on a computer does to my eyes.
Witness protection program up there on my screen, Hager is covering those tired eyes. So there he is. Okay.
Check out that corn stash.
He's trying
Corn
to
stash.
I know. I trended it, Coach Clemenger. So
I want corn stashes, lots of them.
Well, I guess the only other thing we need to think about or talk about at some point, we only have one more part to this book. So we rock and rolled through this book study pretty darn quickly, which I'm okay with. So just thoughts if we want to do, Coach O'Donnell's got a baby flying behind him. If we want to do something after this, if we're, I don't know, I'm game to do whatever. So I can always recommend books if anybody else has got a book recommendation. If we want to keep doing a book study, throw some thoughts out there and we can decide where we want to go from there.
I'd be down for that, obviously, but then I also think if we kicked around about building a curriculum of sorts, if we use our time and energy to do that, I don't know. I'm totally down with whatever.
Read our own book.
Just another idea. And how that would look, when it would happen. We talked about morning stuff 1 day a week. How that would fit with leadership, I don't know. I don't know. I think that was in one of our first talks.
I'm good with starting to create something, having something in place that we could utilize. So, I always tell kids all the time, we can read all these things, but if we just hold it in our head, it's useless wisdom. So,
and that's my point. That's where I'm getting to now. It's been a month or so with quarantine, and I got so many books going, so many ideas, and I'm to a point now where I just need to start building stuff and stop collecting. I got notebooks and I got pieces of paper here and there, and I just need to put it together now.
Well, maybe let's plan on that. We'll wrap up this book and then we can use these sessions to start kind of crafting some things we can come up with. I mean, if we can build a library of resources that we have ready to go when things hit, it'd make all of our work easy. You know, whether we set up a Google folder that's, pulling video clips and what are just trying to craft some questions. What are some good questions we could ask kids coming out of this? And I like somebody I think it was John made the comment that, our teams are going to need different things, but I think we also have an idea of what our teams are going to need at different times. So when we talk about preparing for those pressure points, let's be proactive in those areas and let's find resources that match those things. So when you need something, rather than having to spend an hour looking through clips on YouTube, you can just go to a folder and we've got things pre-made and ready to go. So
I've already started screenshotting a bunch of things in that regard, so I'll continue to do that and I can share them with everybody too.
If you do not know Coach Cooley well enough, he has a Rolodex of random video clips in his head that he can pull up in a moment's notice in Leadership Academy. It's kind of a freaky human trick that he has. It's unbelievable. I don't know how he does it, but he's our resource.
I'd be willing to sacrifice myself to put things into an iBooks author book. So Apple has iBooks, and using iBooks author, I've created some books in the past where you can put content and videos and messages and whatever you want, and it can be in one place and it's in one book that the kids could download into their iBook, or like their iBooks app. So if that's a direction we want to take, I can help with that.
That blows my mind.
I'm reinstalling iBooks author now, so I'll start practicing again. I haven't written a book for a couple of years, but I'll get after it.
Unless it's changed. I think it only works on iPhone though, no Android.
Coach
Yeah,
Clemens
that is-
hates Apple products. So I
Oh,
knew
he
that
does?
was coming.
Coach Clemens is a big Android guy. Big.
Hey,
Okay,
man,
scratch that idea, but we could
I'm
do
just
any
not
sort
a
of
cheap
platform.
like some of you guys.
You could probably use your MacBook for it.
Yeah, you could read it on any Apple product.
Well, when our district
I
goes
just-
1-to-1 and we buy every kid a Mac computer, then we can make it work with our students. So
And I wasn't shooting that down. I just because I was all for it. I was going to do it, and then I found out that Android it didn't sync up. So
You're done.
yeah, I put it on the shelf.
all right. Well, after we finish the book study, maybe we can work on a list of topics, some things that we need. If you've got any video clips, we can start, just start thinking through those things. Maybe grab a piece of paper, start a notebook file or something, or a file in your computer and start throwing some resources in. And many hands make for light work. And we got lots of hands to make for light work. So, all right. I think that's the direction we'll go after we finish up. So we'll read part 4 for, is it 4? Part 3? Part 3 for next week. And then we'll start creating. And we'll beat Millard West at their own game that they're probably paying somebody a ridiculous amount of money to do. So
Screw those guys.
Yeah, I don't like him stealing that all black stuff, whatever.
So
that's a Coach Oldman go-to.
It's a great book.
Yeah.
So, all right.
All right, guys. We'll talk to you later.
Everybody have a great day.
Thanks, Coach.